The first time I noticed something was wrong, I told myself I was getting old. That's what you do when you're 82. You explain things away. You chalk up the small disturbances to the fog of age, to the unreliability of memory, to the particular cruelty of a mind that used to catalog circuit diagrams and now misplaces its own glasses. I told myself that. I believed it for longer than I should have. And that belief, that small, quiet surrender, almost cost me everything I had left. My name is Walter Hayes. I spent 41 years as an electrician. I built the house I live in with my own hands, not a metaphor, not an approximation. I poured the foundation myself, ran every wire through every wall, nailed every board. My wife Margaret helped me paint the rooms the first summer we had it. She chose the color for the kitchen, said it reminded her of the inside of a peach. She's been gone 9 years now, and I still haven't changed it. I'm not ready to. Maybe I never will be. The house was always meant to go to my grandson, Daniel. He's 24, studying civil engineering, steady and quiet the way his grandfather used to be. We had an agreement, not just a wish, a real agreement, written in the kind of clarity that old men write things when they start feeling the shape of time. My daughter Sandra knew about it. She knew since before Daniel was old enough to understand what inheritance meant. I want you to understand what that house is. It isn't property. It isn't square footage and assessed value and lines on a county map. It is 40 years of Margaret's laughter in the hallways. It is the oak tree I planted the year Sandra was born, now taller than the roofline. It is the basement workshop where I built Daniel his first bookshelf when he was 7. His small hands pressing the wood while mine guided the plane. That house is the only thing I have left to give, and someone decided it was theirs to take. If you've ever lived alone with a very sharp memory, you know the strange precision of your own home. You know which drawer sticks, which floorboard speaks, where you always leave the things you always leave. I am not a confused man. I am a methodical one. So when my socket wrench appeared on the wrong shelf in the workshop, not misplaced, deliberately repositioned, I noticed. I didn't say anything. I simply noticed. Then $20 disappeared from the ceramic jar I keep by the kitchen window. I keep cash there for the mail carrier at Christmas, and for the boy down the street who shovels my walk in winter. The amount wasn't the point. The point was that the jar had moved 3 inches to the right and then was set back where it had been. Someone had picked it up, looked inside, and put it down again. Someone who thought I wouldn't notice the difference. I mentioned it to Sandra at Sunday dinner. She set down her fork, exchanged a look with her husband, Phil. A quick look, practiced and fast. The kind of look two people share when they've already discussed something. And then she smiled at me with that particular softness that is not kindness at all. "Dad," she said, "you've been under a lot of stress. You probably just forgot." And Phil nodded beside her, slowly, the way a man nods when he's performing concern and not actually feeling it. That was the first time I felt it, the particular coldness of being managed by someone who should love you. If you felt that, you know it doesn't announce itself as betrayal. It arrives quietly, dressed as care. It comes with lowered voices and gentle suggestions and that careful, patient tone reserved for the elderly and the very young. It makes you doubt your own senses before you can properly name what's being done to you. That dinner was 3 months ago. By the time I understood the full shape of what was happening, I had already been doubting myself for weeks. I want you to stay with me here, because what I'm about to tell you matters, not just to my story, but to anyone who has ever been made to feel smaller than they are by the people closest to them. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because the people who end up here aren't watching by accident. The noises started 2 weeks after that dinner. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. An old man alone in a big house hearing things. I know the story that writes itself around that image. I had written it myself in those first weeks before I knew better. I heard footsteps at 1 in the morning, not loud, not careless, but present. The particular compression of a floorboard under weight. I know this house the way I know my own breathing. I know which step on the basement staircase shifts under pressure and which one holds silent. So when I heard something move through the kitchen at 1:17 in the morning, I didn't imagine it. I got up. I checked. The house was empty, the doors locked, the windows latched. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening. 3 nights later it happened again. Same hour, same weight, same soft movement through the dark. I lay still and counted seconds and listened until it stopped. And then I lay there a while longer, feeling the silence that came after. A different silence than before, the kind that feels occupied. Sandra came by the following week and found me tired. She sat across from me with her hands folded and told me she was worried. She said she'd been reading about elderly men living alone, about how isolation combined with age could create confusion, memory gaps, perceptual distortions. She used those words, perceptual distortions. She had been reading. Phil stood near the door with his arms crossed, nodding at the right moments. They had rehearsed this. I could feel the architecture of the conversation before she reached its conclusion. They wanted me to consider a managed living facility. For my safety, she said, for my peace of mind. I told her I was fine. She told me I was being proud. Phil mentioned the house 3 times in 20 minutes. Its upkeep, its size, its isolation. He mentioned what properties in this neighborhood were selling for. He used the word liquidate, then caught himself and replaced it with simplify. He thought I hadn't noticed. I noticed everything. I went home that night and sat in the workshop in the dark. Margaret's photograph is on the shelf above the workbench. I looked at it for a long time. Then I made a decision. I was going to stop trusting my own doubt and start trusting my own eyes. The basement has an old ventilation panel on the north wall, original to the house, iron grate, paint so old it has texture. I hadn't thought about it in years, but 3 days after that conversation, something made me look at it differently. The screws. 4 screws in the corners of the grate. I remembered them being slightly rusted, tight with age, the kind of hardware that hasn't been touched in decades. 2 of them had fresh scratch marks in the slots. Someone had used a screwdriver on them recently. I took the grate down myself. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. surprised that the hands that had trembled slightly at Sunday dinner pouring water were now completely still. Behind it, fitted into the duct with a strip of adhesive foam so it wouldn't rattle, was a small wireless camera. Black housing, wide-angle lens, no larger than a bar of soap. It was angled toward the center of the basement, toward my workbench, toward where I sat when I worked. I put the grate back, exactly as I had found it. I did not disturb the camera. I did not remove it. I understood even then that it was more valuable in place than in my hand. I went upstairs, made coffee, sat in Margaret's chair by the window, and let the full weight of it settle over me. This is the thing they don't tell you about profound betrayal. It doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives the way electricity does, silent and invisible until it finds the ground, and then it moves through everything. I sat there for 90 minutes without moving, and somewhere in that stillness, something in me shifted. I stopped being a hurt father. I became something else. I became the man who had run current through walls for 4 decades without ever burning the house down. Deliberate, methodical, immune to panic. The camera told me 3 things. First, someone had access to my home without my knowledge, meaning a key had been copied at some point, or a lock had been compromised. Second, whatever they were capturing, they wanted documentation, not simple theft, but footage, the kind that could be presented to someone as evidence. A doctor, a judge, an attorney. Third, the plan had been in motion for longer than I had realized, long enough to install hardware, long enough to be patient. If they wanted footage of a confused old man, I would give them exactly that. I began to perform. Not wildly, nothing theatrical, nothing that would invite an emergency call, but carefully. I left the gas burner running for 30 seconds too long, then turned it off. I walked to the mailbox and stood there a moment too long before coming back inside. I moved objects slightly and let them stay moved. I answered Sandra's calls with just a little more hesitation than usual, just a little more softness in my voice. And all the while, I was doing something else. I had a friend, a man I'd worked alongside for 15 years, named Raymond, retired now, but sharp as ever and with a background in security installation. I told Raymond what I had found, not over the phone, in person, in his truck parked 2 streets away from my house. He didn't say much when I finished. He looked at me for a moment and then said, "So we document them documenting you." Raymond installed 3 small devices of his own, proper residential security equipment, legally registered, motion activated with timestamps. One covering the rear entry, one in the workshop positioned to capture the ventilation panel, one at the front door. We did it on a Tuesday afternoon while Sandra believed I was at my cardiologist appointment. We were done in 40 minutes. Then I waited, and waiting, for a man who has spent a lifetime working with his hands, is not passivity. It is the most active thing there is. It is the full deployment of everything you know. I have spent my whole life knowing how to wait. Electricians learn it young. The work teaches patience, or it breaks you. You wait for the right moment to test the circuit. You wait for the load to settle. You rush a live wire and it teaches you once, and if you survive the lesson, you never rush again. I waited the way I had always waited, quietly, completely, with every sense open. They came on a Thursday night 2 weeks later, 11:47 p.m. I was in bed but not asleep. I heard the back door, the slight mechanical click of the lock turning with a key. I stayed still. I breathed evenly. I listened to 2 sets of footsteps move through the kitchen, down the basement stairs, a murmur of voices, the sound of something being adjusted near the ventilation panel. Then they moved through the rest of the house, slowly, deliberately, stopping in the living room for several minutes. I heard the sound of a drawer opening. They left at 12:23 a.m. I know the exact time because Raymond's equipment logged it with a timestamp to the second. 12:23. I have that number memorized the way I have memorized the distance from the workbench to the fuse box. By feel, by repetition, because it matters. I lay in the dark for a long time after. I was not afraid. I was not even angry, not really. Or if I was, it had burned down to something colder and more useful. I thought about Sandra as a girl, how she used to fall asleep in my truck on the way home from Little League games, how I would carry her inside without waking her, how light she was. I thought about Phil, who I had welcomed into this family 26 years ago, who ate at my table, who I helped move twice. I thought about what kind of calculation turns a family into an instrument. I didn't sleep, but by morning I knew what I was going to do. Raymond reviewed the footage with me. The cameras had captured everything. Their faces, their movements, the tools they brought, the deliberate way they adjusted the existing device. We had timestamps across 3 separate visits. We had audio of a fragment of conversation that included the phrase, "He hasn't noticed." We had footage of Phil opening my desk drawer and removing a document, photographing it with his phone and returning it. That document was my will. The original, drawn up 11 years ago, leaving everything to Daniel. They had photographed it, not stolen it, photographed it, which told me they were smart enough to know its removal would be noticed and foolish enough to believe a photograph was all they needed. I contacted an attorney, not the one who had drawn up the original documents, but a new one, recommended by a colleague of Raymond's. I met with her twice before I was satisfied she understood the full picture. Then I contacted Daniel. I drove to his apartment and sat across from him at his kitchen table and told him everything, calmly and completely. He went very quiet during the middle of it. By the end, his jaw was set and his eyes were dry, and he looked exactly the way his father had looked at his age, which is to say, he looked like a man who had just made up his mind about something. The confrontation happened on a Saturday. I invited Sandra and Phil to the house under the pretense of a family conversation about the future. My attorney was already inside, a notary public, and Daniel sitting in the corner of the living room like a stone. Sandra came in cheerful, slightly over-prepared, already composing her concerned expression for the conversation ahead. Phil had his hands in his pockets the way men do when they think they control the room. I let them sit down. I let them begin. Sandra started with concern, the gentle, rehearsed kind, and Phil added the supporting details, the careful language about capacity and stability and the difficulty of maintaining a property at my age. They were very good at it. They had practiced. Then I set the folder on the table. I placed it without ceremony, without announcement. The way you place a finished circuit board down after the last connection has been made, knowing the work is complete, knowing it will either hold or it won't, and being certain that it will. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked them through the footage, date by date, the entries, the faces, the drawer with the will. I watched Sandra's expression change, not all at once, but in layers, like paint peeling back from something rotted underneath. Phil stopped speaking entirely about 30 seconds in. His hands came out of his pockets. He looked at the attorney, then at Daniel, then at the floor. Sandra said my name once, softly, in a voice I hadn't heard since she was very young. I let it land. And then I told her that the will had been redrawn, that the property was now held in a trust with Daniel as sole beneficiary and with legal provisions that could not be circumvented through any claim of incapacity. That copies of all footage had been provided to law enforcement and were in the care of my attorney. That any further attempt to access my home without my explicit invitation would be treated as criminal trespass. I told her I loved her, because I do, and because it needed to be said. They left without another word. Phil walked out first. Sandra paused at the door and looked back at me, and for just a moment I saw something in her face that wasn't calculation, wasn't strategy, just the face of my daughter, lost inside whatever this had made her. I held her gaze. Then she turned and was gone. The house was very quiet after they went. Daniel stayed. He made dinner. Pasta, not good pasta, but I didn't say anything. We ate at Margaret's table under the peach-colored walls and didn't talk much. The oak tree outside the window was full with late summer. I looked at it for a while. 43 years old this fall, that tree. It has outlasted nearly everything. Drought, ice storms, a lightning strike that took one of its main branches and left a scar along the trunk that has since been absorbed into the wood, grown over, incorporated. That is what endurance looks like. Not the absence of damage, not the erasure of what was lost, the absorption of it, the growth around the wound until the wound becomes part of the structure itself, load-bearing, permanent, proof of everything the tree has survived. I am still in my home. My knees still ache. My hearing is still imperfect. I still walk to the mailbox in the mornings and stand for a moment too long before turning back. Though now I do it because I like the feeling of the air, not as performance. The workshop still smells of sawdust and machine oil. Margaret's photograph is still on the shelves. I didn't win because I was strong. I won because I paid attention when they expected me to stop paying attention. Because I kept my silence when noise would have warned them. Because I understood, somewhere deep in the long experience of being alive, that the most dangerous thing in the world is an old man who has decided to stop being patient. They thought age had made me less. It had only made me quieter. And quieter, in a man who knows how to listen, is not less. It is more. It is the whole advantage. Think about the people in your own life who have been underestimated, or perhaps think about yourself in a moment when someone dismissed what you knew, what you felt, what you were capable of. What did you do with that? What would you have done differently? Leave your answer below. This channel exists for people who understand that dignity is not something that can be taken away by force, only surrendered. And I have no intention of surrendering anything.